Now, item 8W, a somewhat related in that it's MAPS 3, but this has to do with the MAPS 3 transit modern streetcar route.
That's right. Once again, this is, we'll bring this up. This is a proposed modification to the streetcar route. A number of the streetcar subcommittee members are here. They just walked up to the front. I want to make sure you recognize that they're here. In the first slide, shows the proposed route that was received by City Council about a year ago. As I'm sure you're aware, the streetcar subcommittee has done an awful lot of work since then, has been working with Jacobs through their contract with COTPA, and has made a recommendation to modify the route slightly. And I'll show you the second slide shows the new proposed route in red. Most of what is north of Sheridan, particularly on the Robinson and Broadway portions, all the way up to 13th, is identical to the route that you saw before. Portions of this below Sheridan are also similar, but there are some changes. There is now a proposed two-rail route which would go effectively on the east, west, and south sides of the Chesapeake Arena and the Cox Convention Center, then go east on Sheridan and north up to the Bricktown residential area. And that's the significant change that's been made to this proposed plan. This has been vetted by and actually proposed by the Transit Subcommittee. This helps assure that there's coordination between the Convention Center, the Myriad Gardens Park, the new downtown park, Myriad Gardens Park, and with the residential area in north of Bricktown. So those are the significant changes. It's been received and approved by the Citizens Advisory Board, and it is before you today to be received. Sir.
I think, can I ask?
Yes, sure.
Yes. The other entity that needs to be coordinated with, and that frankly I have the most concern with, I think is the most pressing issue, is coordination with ODOT. And I heard Mr. Green's presentation to the Convention Center Subcommittee and to the Transit Subcommittee, and first, I wasn't aware of some of the plans, and so I'm in a little bit of shock that so much of the connection from I-40 West is, and this is outside the purview of MAPS 3, I understand, but that it's above grade, that there's a bridge going over Western, Classen, and Reno, and that it never comes down to grade until we get to Lee. And then for just a short period between Lee and then somewhere halfway between Robinson and Shields, it's at grade, and then it goes below grade to go underneath the railway. So I guess some of my conceptions that we were going to have this long boulevard at grade, that you could have retail development and street development, and I guess are vanishing. And that's very disappointing and sad for me. But in terms of integration with the streetcar, it just didn't seem like Mr. Green, and he admitted that he wasn't part of the rail division of ODOT, and he didn't say no to a lot of the questions that were posed to him, but it didn't seem like that maybe some of the letters that were sent to him over the last year and a half asking for integration, asking for consideration of what was outlined in the intermodal station master plan, which basically called for coordination of the boulevard and the BNSF bridge design with ODOT. Didn't seem like there was a lot of familiarity with that. Mr. Green his understanding was that the streetcar was not running on rail or the electricity at that point. I thought that was a fairly profound shortcoming in terms of the understanding of what was. Now, to be fair, the streetcar until now wasn't going down the boulevard, but now with this route, it will be going double track down the boulevard. And I thought that some of the questions about accommodating the streetcar route both now and then in maybe future, in terms of having utility-free lanes, there just isn't, doesn't seem to be on ODOT's radar. And I have profound considerations as he's talking about fairly quickly wrapping this up, I mean, by 2014 or incentives to do it even earlier, that there has not been the kind of integration with transit. I mean, I understand that there's been some meetings where planning and public works and others have met with ODOT. I'm not sure that ODOT is listening to us or responding to us.
Eric, let's let
Yeah.
Eric respond to that. Eric,
Okay.
how closely are we working with ODOT on the boulevard, and how are we going to incorporate the MAPS 3 streetcar into the boulevard design?
So regarding the city's participation on the boulevard, we've been closely coordinated with ODOT for several months, actually for almost a year now, and we've held a number of meetings. They're aware that we're leaving the possibilities for a streetcar open along the boulevard. Some of the questions that have come up is whether or not it's going to run in a lane of traffic or if it's going to run down the boulevard itself. We've prescribed that we'd like to keep that in a lane of traffic, which is why the traffic lanes for the boulevard are going to be designed much like Project 180, 11-foot lanes that will provide for that. The actual coordination of the streetcar, though, with the regard to the bridge, us passing underneath the Burlington Northern, the heights for that bridge are being set to accommodate the streetcar to make sure that that's a real possibility. But there's still some additional studies when it comes to the streetcar and what those actual requirements are going to be. So there is a consultant that's being engaged, and we have not selected things like track types or the power system for the car. And so there's a lot of planning we can do with ODOT at this point, making sure that we don't put ourselves into a corner. But at the same time, we've got to wait for some of the other consulting to occur so that we know exactly what it is that we're going to construct.
But Eric, I think it's not just what our current plans are, but what didn't seem to be on the radar was the possibility of Phase 3 expansions, additional rail lines in the future, and building the below-grade passage, not just for our plans right now, but for future expansions. And I just want to make sure that gets incorporated into the planning and the coordination to not do all this below-grade construction and then, however many years in the future, have to do something all again.
So the below grade just under the interstate, under the Burlington Northern, we have to do that just for vehicular traffic. Streetcar aside, we're having to make sure that we can accommodate truck traffic and other vehicles that are entering and exiting the boulevard. And so that's all being taken into consideration. So we've not left anything untouched. And so whether it's a streetcar or streetcar expansion, we should be able to accommodate at any point along the boulevard or any of the new construction in 180. In future expansion as we go into Bricktown and west of downtown now with the new boulevard as well.
So just so we're clear, you're considering the Phase 3 build-out expansion of the elevated north-south alignment of BNSF,
I'm not sure what Phase 3 is.
of the intermodal hub study, where in the future you might have light rail, high-speed rail, I mean, the possibility for expanding wider.
So those are discussions that we're having with ODOT and whether there be additional tracks added to the elevated railroad, yes. Those are all being discussed and how that grade works along the new boulevard, yes.
Where you'd put the wall,
Yes,
placing the ramp accordingly.
but they have not finished any of those designs, so we've not gone through a formal design review yet, but all that has been discussed.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Let me, Eric, let me ask you a question though. Explain to me how much of it's a little bit off the subject, but we've got into it here about the boulevard being elevated. How much of it's going to be elevated? And I know it has to be elevated over the track because you can't.
No.
It'll go under the track.
It goes under the track.
I mean, but what's the reason for the elevation on the west end?
We've got the interchanges either at I-35 or at I-44 that are already in elevated conditions, and so it's a matter of bringing those down to grade. The other elevation that Councilman Shadid mentioned was crossing Western, Classen, and some of those other intersections that are just very complicated right now west of downtown. We did not find a good solution to bring it down at grade to get to Western and Classen because they're so close together, the intersections from just a geometric design don't quite work.
I mean, the whole purpose, well, one of the purposes, it seemed to me, in not repairing the existing I-40 was that it was not at grade. It was dangerous, and it will fall apart again the way it fell apart the last time. If it's above grade and freezes and ice freezes it, we're just going to have a miniature of what we tried to get rid of.
So let me define elevated. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bridge like we have seen the I-40 today. What we're looking at is more like overpasses. These would be similar to what you'd see along I-240. Simply, it's on embankments, but it may have some vertical walls on each side, so it's actually on dirt.
How long is this stretch where you're going to have these overpasses?
Basically, from right now, the proposal would be Western Avenue to Lee, but then it would be at grade west of Western, but it might be in an elevated condition. It might be on an embankment as it gets ready to approach and get towards I-44. But it would be at grade, it would be on dirt.
Eric, did you consider a roundabout in that Western Class and Reno area?
They've looked at a lot of options. So the answer is yes, it was discussed, but I don't know that there's been any final decisions made. That would be a complicated arrangement as well, but yes, it's been on the table.
You know, we're not trying to do what ODOT traditionally tries to do. We're not trying to move as many cars along that area as fast as we can. That's not the purpose. The purpose is exactly the opposite of that. The purpose is to have it a slower paced so you can have development. So if you build it like an interstate highway, even if you only build 100 yards of it that way, you've defeated the whole purpose of why we're doing this, why we wanted a boulevard.
We're clearly trying to build this into a boulevard with slow traffic, narrower lanes, into 180 mode. You know, and you come
But
from the
any
east.
place you restrict access on either side of it, it doesn't matter if they're going 8 miles an hour if they can't get off. I mean, if you can't build a business there, if you can't put some reason for people to slow down there, I think we ought to be looking at doing everything we can to make it pedestrian friendly, literally on either side of the boulevard. Otherwise, we're just recreating what we don't want.
Well, one of the things they talked about in the meeting the other day is that if you can picture it, where the old I-40 footprint hits Western, Classen, and goes over Reno, because it's coming at an angle right in there, it would be logistically very hard to put traffic signals in a way that would work if it was all at grade, because you're not more than 100 foot apart as you go down through there. That's their reasoning for bringing it back up. They're going to come, the boulevard is going to be at grade all the way from the tracks until you get to Lee or Dewey or somewhere along in there, and then it's simply got to get up over that Reno Western Classen area, and then it's just following the same design that they've got on the old I-40 now.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, I don't know, from my standpoint, I don't know that I want them to get up and get over there. I want it to be a slower paced boulevard, not a way to get there quicker. And that's ODOT's whole problem is they're based on getting a car out of there as quick as they can. And that's just one way.
Yeah,
That's just another
I think they're
example
taking a
of
lot of steps to do what we want. And this is certainly not new. I mean, I've been aware of where it got to grade for at least 5 years.
Yeah.
Through the Core to Shore process and through all of our discussions through the years, and especially during the vote for MAPS 3, we would a lot of times be asked about the boulevard and the plans for that. So I know it's not necessarily been communicated throughout the community because not everybody cares all that much about a road that's several years away. But to the extent we've had opportunities to talk about it, we certainly have. And one thing it does, I understand the idea of having opportunities to get on and off earlier. But one thing it does, it allows us to more highly concentrate the amenities around that half mile to a mile area where it is at grade, and to really make it a special place. Because we have the same amount of money, we don't have to stretch it out quite as far. But it is an engineering challenge to slow people down that are coming off I-40. And we have talked about how are we going to communicate to drivers that they're, entering a place where a lesser speed is going to be demanded of them very, very shortly. And there are ways to do that.
Do you think we could, because I've only known about it for 5 days. Do you think ODOT's presenting to all the subcommittees? Do you think they could come and talk to us and just kind of?
We're planning on that, sir.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Mike, anything more before we hear from the streetcar folks?
No.
Okay. Thanks. Jeff, you want to come up and give us some thoughts on this?
Good morning. I'm Jeff Bezdek. I serve on your former alternatives analysis committee for the MAPS 3 streetcar and the streetcar subcommittee. We have two other subcommittee members, Mark Gibbs and Jill Adler, here this morning, and Marion Hutchinson, who was on the intermodal hub study. I first wanted to address just quickly a little bit of misinformation regarding the issue with the hub integration. While we're talking about the streetcar route, I just want to make sure that it's on the record what the issue is. When you're coming off of onto the new boulevard off of the Mixmaster, being the I-35 Broadway extension, new I-40 interchange, you're elevated up behind Harkins Theater. That elevated portion starts to come down to grade. And then at the Oklahoma intersection, which is next to the existing U-Haul building, that intersection is at grade. As it passes through that intersection, the boulevard starts to go down again and depress to go underneath the north-south BNSF tracks, which are existing. And so they're essentially building a bridge or a tunnel there to go underneath those tracks, and then it comes back up on the other side and comes back up to grade before we reach the new convention center. Where the concern was at the subcommittee meeting was the folks like Marion who have worked on the intermodal hub study. The intermodal hub study was done in partnership with ODOT and with ACOG, and it provides a developmental plan for that facility 65 years out into the future. And that provides for 3 phases. Now, we don't know how many trains or when trains would come online if we build a regional transit system or if high-speed rail is ever a reality. I mean, who knows? But there are pinch points in that design that are essential to remain free and clear so that that facility can be expanded without huge cost. One of the pinch points as far as the boulevard is concerned is the eastern wall that faces Bricktown, that eastern wall of the elevated track, presumably is going to be moved further east as more tracks are added. Where that declination ramp is coming off of Oklahoma Boulevard is critical to establishing how steep that ramp is and where the ramp is, so that the clearances for semis, for trucks, for vehicles, which I believe is around 16.4, is maintained without having to rip out the boulevard later to redo that grade. In the subcommittee meeting, there was a lot of concern about making sure that ODOT looked at the intermodal hub study. Mr. Green indicated that they had not. And they had not studied this issue, but just simply adjusting that grade at the right place could save the city millions of dollars in the future and make that facility more easily expandable. So on that element, there's a huge design consideration that needs to be coordinated. In fact, the last line of the hub study, the very last line says, this was done by Jacobs with ACOG and ODOT, close coordination with ODOT, Boulevard Design, and the City of Oklahoma City on allowing developments within the urban plaza area exists in the guideway will be needed to ensure long-term capacity of future hub expansions. And it talks about the boulevard, and the future expansion will impact the railroad bridge and potentially the design of the boulevard. The design should take into account the width widening of the east side of the bridge for the elevated guideway, since the road may need to be lowered slightly to provide adequate vertical clearance of the widened bridge. So they didn't seem to be cognizant of the issue. The subcommittee was alarmed by this because there are various volunteers that have served on both committees, and we're concerned about it. As far as the streetcar is concerned, the biggest expense to any kind of rail project is utility relocation. And whether it's since we're building a brand new street, we have an opportunity to stretch the MAPS dollars by integrating a brand-new street and locating the utilities out of the way so that this brand-new street goes in and the streetcar is integrated. Mr. Green suggested that we would be going into final design, I believe it's sometime next year, so essentially we have up until the fall to really firm up our plans on the streetcar to inform their process before they go into final design. And today you approved the contract negotiations with Jacobs URS. Hopefully we can ramp up that process and get those folks in the same room together. But Councilman Greenwell, I noted your comments the other day about trying to get light rail in the future out to Meridian, to the airport, going further west. If we have a future maps or some other initiative that has rail incorporated into it, one of the things that they could do as part of the design is provide a utility-free corridor the entire distance of the boulevard, not just for the MAP streetcar. But nobody's thinking that far in advance, unfortunately. So that meeting last Wednesday was the first chance that we really had to get them in the room with us to tell them we're worried about, we want your people in with our people. Now, as far as the streetcar route, which is before you, is concerned, we listened to council members, we went to other subcommittee meetings, park subcommittee, convention center subcommittee. Mr. Williams Roy Williams of the chamber has been on the tour among, I'd say, probably 30 individuals involved in this process to get feedback. And one thing that kept coming up was needing to touch the park, having a stop right at the park and the new convention center. And since the route came before you last year, we did not know exactly where the convention center was going to be, and we weren't definitively sure that Santa Fe would be the facility or how we would get into Bricktown. Now all those questions have been answered. We now know we can go under the Sheridan Bridge to get in Bricktown. We know that Santa Fe is the hub facility. We know the park subcommittee really wants to stop at their facility, and we know the convention center committee wants to stop integrated into the convention center facility. So this route is a design change. The first route that went before you was a dashed line, and that was intentionally dashed since these questions weren't answered. Now they have been answered. I would like to point out one other thing. Since the route has been put out there, we have seen a developmental response occur. It's been noted Chris Cassee with the Kirkpatrick Foundation is weighing heavily their decision to move City Arts Place to the north end on Broadway because of the streetcar. Gary Brooks with the Edge Development has designed their Mercy redevelopment site to respond to the streetcar. We have seen the new proposals for the Century Center be a direct response in helping with their decisions about this. And I would like to just point out that if First National become one of their huge issues with redeveloping and making that building functional, no matter who's in charge of doing it, is the parking situation. And so having the streetcar flank First National on Robinson and Broadway will perhaps help that building be more viable. And lastly, there have been a lot of concerns about utilities on Robinson and Broadway. I feel confident. I was on the selection team for the consultant, and the consultant has been very responsive to saying, we're going to work to do innovative utility solutions to get around those utilities. And they seem to think that it's not going to be as big of a deal. And they also seem to think that we can speed up the process with the streetcar program overall. And so there's a lot of good news. Unfortunately, things are happening so fast. Just missing a meeting at this point it does affect the other projects going on. So the ODOT situation is huge. The new boulevard situation is huge. Coordination with the outlying Project 180 program, getting Jacobs to get the drawings done for that, that's huge too, just saving money and stretching the MAPS dollar. Do you have any questions? I know there was some discussion as well at the subcommittee meeting about what does the MAPS transit dollar provide for. The way I looked at it initially myself was that we had essentially a $120 million budget. Of course, it's flexible, as all of MAPS is flexible. And then $10 million was added on through the efforts of Mr. White and our former councilman Sam Bowman for doing the commuter rail hub, the intermodal hub, being Santa Fe, and acquiring properties to make that facility functional, which we're only in the process right now of acquiring the hub facility itself. We're actually not in the process because we haven't been directed to or haven't had the opportunity to look at other parcels approaching that facility, and then commuter rail or rail connections to that facility.
Jeff?
Jim, I don't want the meeting to get away from us and get bogged down in a lot of issues that aren't pertinent to the day's agenda. So if somebody wants to say something, fine, but we could be here literally the rest of the day discussing issues that are not necessarily pertinent to the agenda.
I want to make a short comment on
Okay.
what you brought up at the end, and I will try to keep it short.
Okay.
With regard to other projects, it seems to me that we are, you talk about these pinch points. We're at a pinch point right now with regard to what we can use the hub for. And we need, I believe, to start immediately to try to acquire that small section of land, of track right away that UP has that would connect it to the northeast line. Because I think if we'd start now to do that, then we could truly make the hub a hub. Something would hub into that. We could then open up the northeast line. I think that's all part of what was contemplated by the money that was allocated especially for the hub. And I think that's something that ought to be a priority one with regard to that small portion of that $10 million. It ought to be acquiring that section of track. I don't know how far it is. It's probably not more than 4 or 5 city blocks long. Is that?
Well, Mr. White, Mr. Kemper is here. As you're aware, we had a meeting with Union Pacific. 3 councilors
Right.
were in that meeting. Union Pacific essentially said, where's your study, where's your plan? We don't have one. There has been a proposal to put a study together of the Northeast Corridor into the ACOG's alternatives analysis. There are individuals who, including myself, that do not believe that that is the appropriate mechanism necessarily to get all the answers that we need as fast as we need them. But there's...
Don't we need the land no matter what?
Essentially, you probably do, not just to connect the Northeast line,
Right.
but for connecting to Tinker,
I mean, that
Midwest
right-of-way
City.
needs to be there. I mean, it hooks to the only 2 possible short-term, quick rail projects. That's the Tinker line and the Northeast line. It hooks to those. Without that, we couldn't do either one of those.
Well,
Right.
just to button it up so we can move forward with this particular item, it was discussed at the subcommittee meeting this past Wednesday at length. If you would like the Jacobs URS contract to include analysis of approaches to the intermodal hub facility, there is an opportunity for staff to examine that, but the city council would need to direct staff that they would like that study, the streetcar study, to look at other connections and other acquisition, what it would take to make that facility
At the
functional.
risk of not keeping this short, I'd like to see us do that. If it needs to come back here for a vote separate on a separate item, I'd like to see us do that because I just can't believe we can let
We can add that to the scope of the
Yeah,
JP.
I just can't believe we can let that get away from us and hope to go forward. That's just a little small piece of track, but I think it's a big deal.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for letting me speak so regularly about this issue. I do think that the MAP streetcar is often one of the most complicated MAPS projects because of so many areas that it touches and so many neighborhoods that it goes through, and just the breadth of the program. And so we appreciate, we put the effort forth, and just to remind you, we are aware that we work for you and for the citizens of this city. Thank you.
We appreciate your work. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Mayor,
Thanks, Jill.
may I make just a very
Yes.
tiny comment as well?
Yes.
And that is, I just really want to thank the committee and thank everybody here today for working so hard to come up with a solution across the Walnut Bridge. I think that is sort of the crowning jewel to this piece by connecting the residential units, not just at the level, but all of Deep Deuce apartments, and provides for that linkage that we've all talked about for so long up to other parts of town. So I think it's a really beautiful solution to be able to double track it just over the bridge. How lucky we are that the bridge has 3 lanes. There are lots of things that came together to make this work. But I want to particularly thank you and your committee for looking so forward to make sure that that piece happens.
All right. Skip?
And I'll agree with Councilman White. I think the opportunity for us to acquire that track is of major importance. And looking back, I think sometimes, what may not have been the original plan, but if you can recall the debate of the Walnut Bridge, be not for the fierce opposition of those individuals who stood firmly to fight for that bridge, we wouldn't even be talking about that issue as far as a connector now. And so I think that the vision that Councilman White has now realized as it relates to that UP section, is something that we need to seriously consider as far as our opportunity to acquire that for future track connections.
All right. David?
Your Honor, I'll be quick. I would just like to, and it's probably too late to make any difference, but I just think if we would consider, well, first of all, I agree with Councilman White and Councilman Kelly on acquiring that property. We really need to look at that. But as far as the route, if we could spread that out a little bit so that we could have it run more along Reno as it goes into Bricktown to accommodate the hotels out there once we get the convention center opened, and then go a little bit further west, more so out by the Civic Center. And I don't see the need, I know it's going to create some controversy, to go that far north initially. If we looked at the model, for example, like in Portland, Oregon, it's more of a central circular thing around the core part of downtown. And then they start having the other types of rail that connects to it. We've got more of a line going up north that I just think if we flattened it out, we could go through Central Park or the Court of Shore Park, go right by the convention center, go up to the Civic Center, and then go further east into Bricktown to go right along the hotels that are along Reno. Allow us to utilize those hotel rooms to support the convention center when we do have large areas. And I just, again, don't see the need to go that far north. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? How about a motion then on item 8W? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously.